Murka was a striped Siberian mix, an animal known for resilience, independence, and striking fur that caught the light in shades of grey and amber. In 1992, Murka was last seen boarding a passenger train. The conductor remembered the moment clearly. The cat darted inside seconds before departure, slipping through the door as it closed. What seemed like an ordinary movement soon became the beginning of an enduring mystery. The train compartments were crowded that evening. Families filled the benches, travellers carried luggage, and the air smelled faintly of coal smoke from the engine. In the middle of this, Murka found a resting place. Witnesses recalled the cat curling into a compact shape on a wooden bench, leaving behind a shallow indentation in the varnished surface. That indentation would later serve as the only tangible sign of her presence. By the time the train reached its destination, Murka was gone. No collar was discovered, no body, no belongings tied to her. What remained was absence. For the passengers who had noticed her, the silence afterward was uncanny. A striped cat seen one moment, dissolved the next. The disappearance carried a quality that disturbed even those who believed cats were masters of slipping away. Some passengers recalled faint scratching noises near the luggage racks. These were not loud, not disruptive, but steady and soft, like claws meeting wood or fabric. No one checked the source at the time. The noise was dismissed as part of the train's natural rhythm, the constant blend of wheels, gears, and shifting bags. Only later, when Murka was missing, did those scratches assume weight. The sealed structure of a passenger train intensified the mystery. Doors were monitored, windows were narrow, and movement between compartments was limited. Murka's exit, if it occurred, should have left a sign, yet none existed. This paradox framed the case from its very beginning. It was not just a disappearance. It was a disappearance inside boundaries designed to contain. Investigators began by reconstructing the journey. The wooden bench indentation confirmed Murka had rested there. Testimonies aligned on her boarding and brief presence. The scratching sounds near the racks provided a second line of evidence. But what was missing was more striking than what was found. There was no tuft of fur, no trace of struggle, no witness to an escape. The conductor himself remained troubled. He had witnessed countless animals travelling with passengers before, but this instance stood apart. Murka had boarded alone, unaccompanied by any owner, unclaimed by any traveller. Her independence already marked the case with strangeness. Cats often travelled in baskets or bags. Yet here was one slipping into the human flow as if determined to belong among them. When the train halted and emptied, the inspection began. The wooden bench indentation was noted. The luggage racks were examined. Scratches, faint but present, were observed on the supporting beams. They did not appear new, nor did they confirm Murka's path, yet they held symbolic value. The physicality of those marks suggested activity. Still, without confirmation, they were no more than possibilities etched in wood. For the passengers, memory played tricks. Some swore they saw Murka vanish during the ride, disappearing into shadows between seats. Others insisted they glimpsed her near the vestibule, crouched as if preparing to leap. None of these recollections held certainty. Each recollection was shaped by the shock of the outcome, an empty train, no cat. The case's difficulty lay in its ordinariness. A train ride, a wooden bench, a striped cat. These elements contained nothing theatrical on the surface, yet together they produced an unresolved puzzle. How does a cat, witnessed boarding and resting, vanish mid-journey on a sealed vehicle? That was the immediate question, and it carried implications that disturbed investigators and witnesses alike. The lack of answers carried weight. Absence became the central evidence. Where animals usually leave fur, scent, or sound, Murka left only silence. The indentation on the bench became symbolic of presence turned absence. Every retelling returned to that simple imprint, a shape that testified she had once been there. Cinematically, the scene played in fragments. the dart through the door, the curled body on the bench, the scratches near the racks, the empty destination platform. These fragments formed a sequence without resolution. Each image was clear on its own, but together they failed to complete the story. From the outset, the disappearance felt unnatural, not because of supernatural implication, but because of the contradiction between evidence and result. Closed compartments should not allow vanishing. Wooden benches should not carry indentations without occupants. Scratches should not echo without a source. These contradictions define Chapter 1 and set the tone for what followed. For investigators, the unanswered question remained open-ended. Was Murka lost inside compartments, hidden in a place unseen? Did she find a gap, a passage, a point of escape no one noticed? Or was her fate sealed within the very machinery of the train itself? None of these lines reached conclusion. The unresolved status of Murka's journey transitioned directly into the next stage. Investigators prepared to search the train thoroughly. Every rack, compartment, and undercarriage became a subject of scrutiny. What began as a small observation of a cat darting onto a train had become an official inquiry. The case of the vanished passenger was no longer dismissed as trivial. From its first clue, it carried weight. A striped Siberian mix entered a train. A wooden indentation marked her rest. Scratches whispered from racks. The destination brought only absence. This was the beginning of the investigation. Inspectors tasked with examining the compartment after Murka's disappearance began their work with precision, moving slowly through every corner of the train car. The first discovery came not from the benches, the racks, or the floor, but from the paint of one of the compartment doors. Deep grooves ran down the surface, cutting into the finish, like hurried handwriting scratched by desperation. The marks were uneven, clustered together in short bursts, as though something small but determined had fought with all its strength to break through. At once the inspectors recognized what they were looking at. These were not dents from luggage, nor scuffs from careless passengers. The scratches were narrow, sharp, and vertical, the undeniable signature of a cat's claws. The grooves told their own kind of testimony. The paint had been stripped away in jagged lines, leaving the lighter underlayer exposed. Some marks overlapped, as though the cat had leapt and struck again and again, raking furiously. To those trained in reading evidence, the impressions revealed both speed and intent. The animal had not been idle, it had been fighting. Yet this was no ordinary discovery. These scratches, though clear, raised more questions than answers. One passenger, questioned immediately after the train reached its destination, recalled hearing a faint sound near the luggage racks. It was a brief meow, distant but distinct, heard just as the journey neared its end. The passenger could not recall the exact timing, only that the sound had come, lingered for a second, then faded into silence. When inspectors followed up, no cat appeared, no body was recovered, no fur clung to the doorframe. The only certain thing left behind was the scratched paint, stubborn and undeniable. The absence of physical traces added confusion. Normally, a struggling animal left more behind: a tuft of fur, a set of paw prints in dust, or even faint residue of movement along the walls. Here, nothing of the sort was present. The floor beneath the door was swept clean. No claw sheaths, no loose hair, no signs of bleeding or injury. It was as if Murka had pressed against the door, clawed it with intensity, and then vanished. The compartment had been thoroughly cleaned after passengers left, but such cleaning rarely erased everything. Investigators knew this from experience, which made the pristine emptiness more unsettling. This absence forced the inspectors into difficult reasoning. If Murka had managed to force her way through the door, the act should have left clearer evidence of passage. A cat escaping a compartment typically brushed against panels, left paw prints along the corridor, or startled passengers along the way. Yet no testimony confirmed a sighting. No conductor reported an animal darting through the aisles. If Murka had escaped into the station after arrival, then dozens of eyes should have noticed her, even in fleeting motion. The lack of reports strongly contradicted the idea of a successful exit. If the cat had remained trapped inside, the mystery deepened further. Cleaning crews moved through the compartments after every trip, lifting cushions, sweeping floors, and checking for items left behind. A living cat, frightened and hidden, would have revealed itself quickly. A deceased animal would have been found without delay. In Murka's case, nothing appeared. Inspectors questioned cleaners, attendants, and maintenance staff. Every answer was the same. No one had seen a cat. No one had found remains. The train carried passengers, but apparently it had not carried the animal to its visible end. For investigators, the scratches came to symbolize both evidence and mockery. They were undeniable proof that Murka had been in the compartment during the journey, struggling at some point in desperation. Yet they mocked the search because they refused to explain what followed. A narrative had been carved into paint, but left unfinished. The investigators could read the beginning. A cat trapped, fighting with claws, reaching for release. But the conclusion was missing. The scratches ended mid-story. Those who reviewed the case later reflected on the eerie precision of this evidence. Scratches do not lie. They cannot be invented after the fact without detection. They appear where claws touch surfaces, and their depth reflects force. The lines across the paint were authentic. They confirmed Murka's presence as securely as a signature. But they confirmed nothing beyond that. The inspectors could not say whether she clawed them hours before arrival or moments before the final stop. They could not determine whether she fought to escape, succeeded, or perished quietly in an unseen corner. The scratches became the focal point of the file, photographed repeatedly from multiple angles, measured carefully, and compared against standard dimensions. Analysts confirmed that their width matched the claws of a domestic cat, eliminating doubts of another cause. They also confirmed that the scratches were fresh, their edges sharp, unsoftened by time. This cat had left them recently, during the course of the journey, not long before discovery. Yet the evidence stood isolated. Every attempt to anchor the scratches into a larger chain of proof faltered. No next step followed. No connecting clue extended beyond them. The inspectors left the compartment with photographs, notes, and questions, but without resolution. What remained, finally, was the unsettling thought that the cat had been there, undeniably, at some point along the route. Murka had fought, her claws embedding her struggle into the door's surface. But whether she broke free, disappeared into the labyrinth of stations, or slipped away in some other unrecorded manner, the scratches refused to yield. They stood as evidence of presence and absence at once. In the end, the marks on the door became the strongest reminder of the case's unsolved nature. They bore witness without conclusion, hinting at escape or entrapment, but confirming neither. The unanswered testimony of paint and claw carried forward into the next phase of investigation, leading searchers to broaden their scope. Chapter 3 would follow the trail beyond the train itself, turning attention to the stops along the route, in hope that outside the compartment's confines, new evidence might surface. At a remote siding in Siberia, the winter landscape stretched unbroken. White snow layered over the tracks, soft yet firm enough to capture impressions of movement. It was there that villagers reported a discovery both ordinary and unsettling, a line of paw prints scattered across the snow near the rails. They were not large, not belonging to a fox, dog, or wolf. Instead, they were small and delicate, the kind a domestic cat might leave as it pressed forward with cautious steps. When measured, the size aligned with Murka's known dimensions. The stride was short, deliberate, and evenly spaced. Investigators took sketches, bending close to record the depth and shape before weather could erode the evidence. Each paw mark pressed clearly into the top layer, crisp around the edges, confirming the tracks were recent. The absence of human footprints nearby made the discovery more striking. Whoever had passed here was not guided, not accompanied. The trail began close to the siding, as though the cat had stepped from the railway embankment itself. The prints moved in a line toward the forest edge. Villagers recalled how they had gathered quietly, pointing to the small indentations, their breath fogging in the frozen air. Whispers carried about animals vanishing in these woods, though no proof ever surfaced. In Murka's case, the silence of the snow amplified the mystery. Investigators noted the pattern carefully. Domestic cats often leave erratic prints, weaving side to side. Murka's trail suggested a purposeful direction, yet just meters before the forest line the prints ended. There was no sign of disturbance, no drift of snow covering the rest, no scattering as if startled. The last print sat alone, facing the trees. Beyond it, the surface stretched blank and untouched. That ending point marked the central puzzle. How could a trail stop so suddenly without continuation? The forest loomed nearby, dark pines closing ranks against the white field. If Murka had entered, she should have left a path. Snow preserves motion, steps echo in patterns. But here, preservation cut short. The silence of the ground carried the weight of erasure. For villagers, the meaning carried unease. They murmured about disappearances, animals wandering into the woods never to return. Yet there was no fur scattered, no blood staining the snow, no sign of predation. The scene carried none of the violence typical of attacks. Instead, the prints delivered presence turned absence, a narrative without conclusion. Investigators returned to their measurements. They confirmed stride length matched a cat's proportion, neither stretched by running nor compressed by hesitation. Murka had moved steadily, each paw leaving its mark with equal weight. There was no sign of limping, no irregularity. Health, balance, and intent all appeared intact, but that intact record ran against the abrupt halt. The siding itself was isolated, bordered by rails, snowbanks, and the shadow of dense forest. Few travelled there except villagers who lived nearby. For Murka to exit a moving train at this point, without notice, raised questions. No passenger reported seeing a cat leap. No conductor witnessed a door opening. The train had passed, yet the paw prints stood as evidence of presence. The juxtaposition remained striking. A sealed train where disappearance was impossible, followed by paw prints appearing in isolation beside the tracks. The transition between the two could not be bridged by observation. Investigators were left with fragments. Inside the train, an indentation on a bench. Near the siding, tracks in snow. Between the two, silence. Each paw print resembled a breadcrumb, but, unlike trails that guide searchers forward, this one dissolved. Instead of leading deeper into knowledge, it folded into absence. Sketches captured the line faithfully, yet no drawing could answer why the marks ceased before the forest. They offered evidence without resolution. For those studying the case, the snow scene underscored the difficulty of investigating absence. A clear trail, measurable and documentable, culminated in nothing. The blank field beyond the final mark symbolized the wider mystery surrounding Murka. Traces appeared, but endings provided no closure. The cold Siberian air, the stillness of the siding, and the weight of observation gave this chapter its cinematic tone. Witnesses stood in silence, gazing at the final paw print, as if waiting for it to continue on its own. The forest remained indifferent, holding no visible sign of entry. Snow lay unbroken, denying explanation. This discovery advanced the investigation not through answers, but through complication. The prints belonged to a domestic cat. They aligned with Murka. They existed at a siding reached by the train, yet they terminated without conclusion. In the language of evidence, it was a contradiction. Presence and disappearance combined into one. The unanswered question lingered over the investigation. How had Murka departed a sealed train? How had she reached such an isolated region without a single witness? And why did her trail dissolve into nothing so close to the forest? These questions mark the shift in the case. By late 1992, months after Murka's disappearance from the train, reports surfaced far from the railway line. A rural village, modest in scale and centered around barns, fields and narrow lanes, became the setting of renewed attention. Villagers remembered a stray cat that appeared suddenly, moving cautiously but with an unmistakable presence. Its coat bore distinctive stripes, the same Siberian mix markings that defined Murka. For a community accustomed to ordinary farm cats, this animal carried something different, something memorable enough that stories remained vivid years later. One farmer in particular spoke of the encounter in detail. He recalled seeing the animal stand near his barn at dusk, its eyes reflecting faint light as it studied him from a distance. What drew his attention, however, was not only the pattern of the fur, but the small leather collar clasped around its neck. Hanging from the collar was a thin medallion, metallic and polished, glinting faintly even under fading daylight. The farmer found it strange because true strays rarely wore collars, let alone collars in such condition. Farm cats, when they appeared, usually carried the rough marks of outdoor life: frayed fur, tangled coats, worn accessories if any at all. This animal seemed different, bearing a collar too clean, too deliberate, to fit the role of an ordinary wanderer. The detail of the medallion became the strongest part of his account. He could not describe exact inscriptions if there were any, but the surface reflected sharply. It appeared well maintained, untouched by rust or dirt, as though crafted for significance. The farmer later admitted he considered approaching, but the cat kept its distance, retreating toward the edge of the barn whenever he stepped closer. He made no attempt to chase it, choosing instead to watch as it slipped into the shadows and disappeared into fields beyond his reach. The next morning, he shared what he had seen with neighbors. His story spread quickly through the village, drawing mixed reactions. Some accepted the possibility at once, believing that Murka had endured and wandered into their community. They pointed to the markings, the collar, and the medallion as clear identifiers. Others dismissed the notion, suggesting the animal was merely another stray, one that happened to resemble the missing cat from the train. Rural areas often attracted wandering animals, and memories, they argued, could play tricks. Still, the account lingered. It was not easily forgotten. Over the weeks that followed, others claimed sightings of the same cat. Each report carried similar details: the striped coat, the cautious manner, and the leather collar with its unusual ornament. But every sighting shared another common feature: the cat never stayed. It appeared briefly, usually near barns or grain stores at night, accepted food if left out, then vanished before anyone could close the distance. Villagers who left scraps of meat or bowls of milk found them consumed by morning, though no one ever witnessed the animal feeding directly. Its presence became something whispered, a quiet ritual of acknowledgement passed among those who hoped to see it again. Despite repeated attempts, no one succeeded in capturing the cat or even photographing it. It remained elusive, allowing only glimpses before retreating into the night. For investigators, this made the case difficult. Testimony abounded, but tangible proof remained absent. There were no recovered collars, no medallions turned in, no paw prints preserved in mud or snow. All that existed were consistent recollections of the same details, voiced by different villagers across different occasions. Yet, in this accumulation of whispers lay the first concrete link investigators could not ignore. Until then, Murka's case had consisted of absence, vanished traces on a train, scratches without a conclusion, silence at every stop. Now, a new possibility had emerged. A collar, described repeatedly and clearly, stood apart from rumor. Cats did not craft their own accessories. Collars, especially with polished medallions, indicated human origin. Someone at some point had fitted this animal with the object. If the villagers were correct, then the wandering cat was not simply a stray. Whether the animal was Murka could not be proven by testimony alone, but investigators recognized that the medallion might hold answers. Collars carried identifiers, often names, sometimes addresses, sometimes other marks of ownership. If recovered, it could confirm survival, location, and connection. For the first time since the disappearance, the trail pointed toward an object with the potential to explain. The villagers continued their quiet watch, leaving food near barns, speaking softly of the cat that came only at night. It became part of their winter stories, a figure that existed between presence and absence, seen but never held. The mystery of Murka did not resolve in their fields, but in their whispers, the outline sharpened. The collar sighting marked the beginning of a new path for investigators, one that carried them beyond speculation and toward tangible evidence. The medallion, gleaming in memory, became the thread connecting the village to the broader investigation. It pointed toward ownership, history, and the possibility of survival. Chapter 5 would follow this thread, uncovering what investigators learned when they pursued the meaning behind the collar and its mysterious metal emblem. Word of a collar medallion spread quickly across the surrounding settlements. Villagers spoke of a cat seen slipping between barns and rail yards, moving with the elusive grace only cats possess. What distinguished this animal from strays was not its fur, its gait, or its size, but the gleam of metal hanging from its neck. Witnesses recalled a small round tag that caught the light when the cat turned. Descriptions varied, yet the theme remained constant. The medallion was etched with markings. Some farmers insisted the letters formed a name in Cyrillic, clear and unmistakable, Murka. For them the connection was immediate. The cat sighted in the fields matched the one reported missing from the passenger train. Others were less certain. They argued the markings resembled a number, perhaps an identification code tied to the railway. In their view, the medallion was not personal, but institutional. Still others admitted the image blurred in their memory, leaving only the impression of something metallic swaying beneath the cat's chin. Investigators listened carefully to each account. The details shifted depending on who spoke, but the presence of the medallion remained consistent. That single fact transformed the narrative. A collar indicated ownership, or at least contact with humans who cared enough to attach one. If Murka was simply a stray, how had she come to wear a piece engraved with symbols? If she was claimed, why did no one step forward? The medallion's ambiguity unsettled investigators. On one hand, it suggested survival. The sighting of a cat wearing such an item implied Murka had endured beyond her disappearance. On the other hand, the absence of proof, no captured image, no recovered collar, meant the clue hovered between rumor and evidence. Farmers swore they saw it, yet each time they moved closer, the cat slipped away, vanishing into sheds, rail yards, or tree lines. The round shape carried symbolic weight. A dangling disc catching winter light became more than an accessory. It was a key suspended in plain view, yet always beyond reach. The medallion embodied the tension between presence and absence, just as the indentation on the train's bench and the paw prints in snow had done before. Each clue left a trace but withheld resolution. As news of the medallion spread, its meaning deepened. If the letters spelled Murka, then the case reached a point of recognition. It would mean the cat identified in villages was the same one that boarded the train in 1992. That connection would extend her story into survival. If instead the markings were numbers or railway codes, the implication shifted. The medallion might have tied her to the system itself, suggesting she had been tagged, tracked, or marked for reasons unknown. The farmers' testimonies became a patchwork. One claimed he saw the cat perched on a fence post at dusk, the medallion glinting as the last light of day fell across the fields. Another insisted he glimpsed it darting across snow, the tag bouncing against its chest. Each account placed the cat within reach, yet never within grasp. The elusiveness turned every sighting into an echo of the central mystery. Investigators sketched descriptions, recording the shape, the shine, the supposed letters. Yet sketches could not capture certainty. Without the object in hand, analysis remained speculative. Still, the medallion took center stage. It was not just an accessory, it was evidence of intent. Whether by owner, stranger, or system, someone had chosen to mark this cat. The presence of an engraved medallion introduced contradiction. If Murka was independent, moving as strays do, then why bear a tag with meaning? If she was owned, why remain unclaimed, slipping through villages without retrieval? Each possibility generated questions that multiplied rather than diminished. For those following the case, the medallion became the dangling key. It symbolized both continuity and confusion. Its image tied the sightings together, creating a thread that stretched back to the vanished passenger on the train. Yet, its elusiveness kept resolution distant. By the close of this chapter, the medallion had shifted the investigation's focus. From wooden indentations to paw prints in snow, each clue pointed to absence. The medallion suggested survival, but survival without explanation deepened the riddle. Time moved forward, carrying with it silence. By the late 1990s, the case of Murka the cat had faded from memory for most. The train disappearance had slipped into obscurity, reduced to a few whispers in the village and the fading recollections of those who once believed they had seen her. By the turn of the millennium, nearly everyone assumed the mystery had ended quietly. Murka, once a vivid presence, was presumed gone. In the winter of 2000, however, a discovery brought the case sharply back into focus. A farmer, working his frozen fields, pushed a plough across hard ground when the blade struck something unexpected. At first, he believed it to be a rock or scrap of rusted metal, but when he stopped and cleared the soil, a small, tarnished object came into view. He lifted it from the dirt and brushed away frozen earth clinging to its surface. What he found was a medallion, small, metallic, and clearly aged. Though dulled by years in the ground, its engraving remained faintly visible. On the surface, worn but unmistakable, was the single word, Murka. The name carried its weight instantly. The farmer knew enough to recognize the connection. This was not random. It matched the exact descriptions villagers had spoken of nearly 8 years earlier, when they told of a striped cat wearing a collar with a polished emblem. The object, simple in form yet extraordinary in implication, stopped him in his tracks. In that frozen field, with nothing but the sound of the wind, he understood the weight of what lay in his hands. It was not just a piece of metal. It was the first physical artifact directly tied to Murka since the day of her disappearance. For investigators, it would represent the transition from story to substance. The discovery raised immediate questions. How had the medallion travelled here, so far from the railway line where Murka was last seen? The village sightings of the early 1990s placed the cat nearby, but no one could account for her path beyond those barns and fields. Now, the medallion's presence suggested movement across distance and time, but the specifics remained out of reach. More pressing was the question of condition. Though tarnished, the medallion had survived remarkably well. The engraving, though faint, remained readable. This suggested that it had not lain in the soil for decades, but for a period closer to the 8 years since Murka's disappearance. Could this mean it had been lost more recently? If so, had the animal been alive long after the original incident? Or had the collar detached earlier, carried across the landscape by unknown means, before settling into the earth where it was found? The ambiguity offered no closure. Instead, it deepened the enigma. Investigators could not immediately place the timeline of its loss. What they could affirm was its authenticity. The inscription matched the name. The villagers' descriptions matched the form. The recovered medallion bridged the memory of whispered accounts with undeniable physical reality. The farmer, recognizing the importance, delivered the object to local authorities, who in turn contacted those still interested in the unresolved case. For them, the medallion was more than a relic. It was a potential lead, the first in years, and perhaps the only clue capable of unlocking further understanding. After 8 years of silence, the medallion's sudden appearance reopened doors, thought permanently closed. Murka's fate remained uncertain, but her name, etched into metal, had endured. The story was not finished. The recovered medallion would soon pass into the hands of experts. In Chapter 7, attention shifted from the field to the laboratory, where specialists began analyzing its origin, composition, and the meaning it might still hold. Forensic analysis of the recovered medallion provided the first tangible evidence in years. Under controlled light, the surface revealed a history written in scratches and stains. Specialists observed the metal bore signs of exposure to harsh elements, but the degree of wear told a specific story. It had not lain buried for 8 years, as some suspected. The oxidation was shallow, the abrasions recent. This was an object lost not in the distant past, but in the near present. Soil particles clung stubbornly to the rim and grooves. Laboratory testing traced their composition back to the nearby forest rather than the farmer's field where the medallion had reportedly surfaced. This finding shifted the investigation's geography. If the soil matched the forest, then the medallion's last location was not agricultural land but wooded ground beyond the village. The distinction mattered. It altered the map of Murka's possible movements, drawing focus away from open fields and into denser terrain where sighting her would be more difficult. The scratches on the surface told a further story. They were not uniform, not the product of long-term corrosion. Instead, they suggested recent contact, scraping against branches, fences, or perhaps stones as the medallion moved through environment rather than resting dormant beneath it. Forensic examiners concluded the object had been in active circulation until shortly before discovery. The implication was clear. If the medallion had been lost recently, then the cat wearing it, Murka, or another feline carrying her identifier, had been alive within that same time frame. This revelation reignited the case. Where absence had dominated the narrative, evidence now suggested presence. News of the forensic findings spread quickly through nearby settlements. Witnesses once again stepped forward, recalling glimpses of a striped cat darting through barns or along fence lines. Some described a figure slipping into haystacks, others a shadow moving across moonlit yards. None held proof, but the medallion's analysis lent their testimonies new weight. The cat became known in whispers as a ghost of the past. Villagers spoke cautiously, aware that memories blurred with time, yet the medallion grounded their accounts, tying fleeting images to a physical object that confirmed activity. It was no longer only rumor. Science had provided anchor points. Investigators charted the soil analysis against maps of the region. The forest where the particles originated became a focal area. Patrols and searches increased, though the terrain complicated efforts. Dense trees and undergrowth created natural concealment. A cat, agile and cautious, could move unseen for years. The medallion hinted at such endurance. Forensics could not confirm the identity of the wearer, but context leaned heavily toward Murka. The inscription, debated in earlier testimonies, and the timeline of discovery aligned too closely with her disappearance to ignore. Yet uncertainty persisted. Could another striped cat have inherited or carried the object? The scratches and soil provided clues, but not answers to ownership. What remained undeniable was that the medallion had been active in recent seasons. It had not slept 8 years beneath earth. It had been worn, moved, and then lost. its presence reinforcing the idea of survival long after the train incident. The case, once fading into memory, now burned again. Soil and metal spoke together, pointing investigators toward renewed pursuit. The ghost was alive in testimony, perhaps alive in truth. By early 2001, the case that many had long considered closed took another unexpected turn. Reports surfaced not from the railway or distant fields, but from the barns of the same rural village where whispers of Murka had first taken root years before. Workers tending livestock began to speak of a striped cat slipping quietly into haylofts, moving with practiced stealth and vanishing before anyone could draw close. The stories, at first passed in casual conversation, soon carried weight because the details remained consistent across multiple accounts. One worker described entering a dim barn just after dawn, hearing a faint rustle above the hay. When he climbed the ladder, he caught sight of a cat watching him from the rafters. Its coat, striped and familiar, stirred an old memory. Before he could move closer, the animal leapt, disappearing into shadowed gaps and out through an opening in the roof. Another worker, recalling a similar encounter, insisted he noticed a brief glint near the animal's neck, as though something metallic caught the faintest edge of light before it slipped away. The possibility that this cat might be Murka unsettled and intrigued the villagers. Nearly a decade had passed since her disappearance, yet the details matched too closely to ignore. A striped Siberian mix, appearing not as a common farm stray, but as a distinctive figure with features consistent across years of testimony. The doubts of misidentification remained, but repetition of the same descriptions made dismissal harder to justify. The barns soon became a focal point for renewed investigation. Farmers and locals, spurred by memory and curiosity, sought tangible proof of the elusive visitor. Traps were placed in corners, baited with food. Cameras were set up near entrances and along lofts, positioned to capture movement if the cat returned. Workers adjusted routines, hoping to catch even a clearer glimpse. Yet the animal resisted every attempt. Each time it appeared, it escaped before capture, retreating into gaps too narrow or paths too swift for pursuit. The cameras often recorded only blurs, a shadow slipping past, a faint flicker of movement in dust-filled light, or the fleeting impression of a tail. The traps were found disturbed, bait removed, yet no cat remained inside. What the animal did leave behind, however, were traces that could not be ignored. Tufts of fur, pale and striped, clung to rough wooden beams where it had brushed past. Paw prints, broken and partial, pressed into dust and straw, offered further confirmation. Though not complete, these fragments built a case for reality. Something had been there, something consistent with the description of the striped cat villagers connected to Murka. Investigators catalogued these remnants carefully, aware that while they did not prove identity, they marked presence. Each tuft of fur and each fragmented paw print drew the possibility closer. The evidence suggested that the barns were more than coincidence. They had become the chosen ground of the elusive animal, a space where survival and evasion intertwined. For the villagers, the sense of a ghost returned. A decade after the train incident, Murka's name once more circled conversations, carried now not by fading memory, but by recurring sightings. Whether she truly roamed those barns, or whether another cat inherited her likeness, the effect was the same. The mystery lived on, refusing resolution. The barns, filled with silence and shadows, had become a hunting ground for answers. The next chapter would see those answers sharpen, as the traces left behind began to transform into physical evidence more conclusive than glimpses or whispers. Inside an abandoned barn at the edge of a rural settlement, investigators found the first material trace of Murka in years. Dust hung in the air as they moved carefully through the structure, beams creaking overhead. In the dim light, a single nail protruding from one of the wooden posts held strands of striped fur. The hairs were faint, clinging loosely as though caught in passing. Collected and examined, the fur displayed a texture and color that aligned with Murka's known breed. Siberian mixes often carried dense, layered coats designed to withstand cold. The strands exhibited the same qualities: a coarse guard hair interlaced with a softer undercoat. The striping matched descriptions preserved from earlier witness accounts, alternating bands of grey and dark brown that shimmered under direct light. At the time, DNA testing in rural Russia was limited, unable to provide the precision available today. Still, investigators relied on morphology, texture, and color analysis. By those standards, the match was strong. For the first time since the train incident, physical evidence pointed to Murka's survival beyond rumor, beyond sighting, into measurable fact. Yet, the discovery carried an immediate contradiction. The fur samples contained no trace of the medallion. If Murka had worn the engraved collar, why did the evidence not include any sign of it? The barn nail bore only hair, no thread of fabric, no broken clasp, no metal fragment. The absence raised new questions. Had Murka shed her collar before passing through this structure? Or did the fur belong to another striped cat of similar appearance? The barn itself added atmosphere to the finding. Dust coated the floorboards, suggesting long neglect. Tools lay rusted, hay scattered in uneven piles. In such conditions, a wandering animal could move unnoticed, leaving only the briefest trace. The fur, suspended on a nail, stood as that brief trace. Investigators documented the scene thoroughly. Sketches marked the location of the post, photographs recorded the strands before collection, and testimonies confirmed the absence of other animals matching the description nearby. While conclusive DNA proof was lacking, the circumstantial alignment was compelling. The fur offered both clarity and confusion. It confirmed presence, yet left ownership unsettled. It bridged the past with the present, but also fractured the narrative with missing details. Murka appeared alive, yet undefined, her identity still suspended between evidence and doubt. By the spring of 2001, the mystery of the striped cat gained a new level of structure. Until then, accounts had been scattered. Fragments of sightings in barns, fleeting glints of metal, paw prints left in dust. Investigators decided to apply more systematic methods. Animal trackers, experienced in following elusive creatures across fields and forests, were called to examine the evidence. Their task was to determine whether the cat moving through the region was indeed the same animal villagers remembered, and to understand how it survived so long beyond its disappearance. The trackers began by compiling reports into a timeline. Each sighting was placed on a map, marked with precision wherever barns, haylofts, or grain stores had yielded a glimpse. From there, they traced outward, extending their search to fields and forests surrounding the village. Gradually, a pattern emerged. The cat's movements were not random. They formed a loose but recognizable trail, curving around human settlements rather than cutting through them. This suggested deliberate avoidance. Murka, if it was truly her, moved with awareness of people, steering clear of direct contact while circling close enough to access shelter when needed. Observations reinforced the impression of independence. Food bowls and scraps, often left outside barns in hope of attracting her, went untouched. Instead, small prey in the area showed signs of predation. Tracks suggested the animal hunted consistently, relying on instinct rather than charity. Such behavior indicated a remarkable survival capacity, particularly for a domestic cat thought lost nearly a decade earlier. The trail expanded through careful field work. Paw prints were documented, tufts of fur gathered, and behavioral patterns noted. Trackers described an animal that traveled at night, favored the cover of hedgerows, and used barns only briefly before moving on. It was a cycle of evasion, present long enough to be noticed, gone before capture became possible. Then came the discovery that shifted the tone of the search. At the far edge of the map trail, in a patch of overgrown grass near the boundary of a field, trackers found an object. It was small, worn, and lying partly concealed in the soil. When they lifted it, The item revealed itself as a snapped leather collar. The break was clean, the fastening torn as though from strain or age. The medallion once attached was absent. The collar stood as a chilling marker. It linked directly back to the earliest village accounts, to the polished emblem that had carried Murka's name. Its discovery at the outermost point of her supposed range suggested a conclusion the trackers hesitated to voice. The broken collar marked the next stage of the mystery. Had Murka finally reached her end, leaving only fragments of her past behind? Chapter 11 would confront that haunting possibility. The search party moved cautiously along the overgrown path, every step measured in silence. It was here, half buried beneath a tangle of roots and leaves, that they uncovered the object which would shift the tone of the investigation. A fragment of Murka's collar. The leather was weathered, its once polished surface cracked from exposure to rain and frost. The buckle, bent at an unnatural angle, had snapped clean through. The familiar medallion, engraved with Murka's name, was absent. What remained looked less like a symbol of identity and more like debris discarded by time. For investigators, the collar fragment cut deeper than any paw print or tuft of fur. Up until this point, every clue had carried a faint suggestion of survival. Whispers of sightings, traces of fur, prints in the mud. But a broken collar implied something different. Struggle, loss, or simply the wearing down of years. Close to the collar, pressed into the damp soil, were paw prints. They were fresh, edges still defined, as though left only days earlier. To the trained eye, they resembled the tracks of a domestic cat. The size aligned with Murka's profile, neither too small nor too broad. Yet the lack of certainty meant the prints could not be tied definitively to her. The juxtaposition unsettled investigators. A broken collar hinted at absence, perhaps even death. Fresh tracks suggested continued presence. The two forms of evidence collided, refusing to resolve into a single truth. Questions mounted. Had the collar fractured naturally, weakened by weather and years of wear? Or had it been forcibly removed, tugged, broken, or discarded in circumstances unknown? The absence of the medallion added another layer. That disc of metal had always served as Murka's beacon, her tether to recognition. Without it, even the discovery of the cat herself would lack the final mark of proof. Investigators catalogued the fragment with care, photographing it from multiple angles, measuring the dimensions, and sealing it in evidence bags. Still, the object was as much a riddle as it was a relic. The collar bore no signs of claw or tooth marks that might suggest an attack, nor did it show a clean cut indicative of deliberate removal. It had simply broken, but how, and under what circumstances, remained unknowable. For those who had followed Murka's story since the day she vanished, the collar's discovery was both confirmation and heartbreak. It placed her undeniably in this landscape. It also signaled a possible end to the long arc of her journey. The investigation into Murka's disappearance never produced the certainty investigators sought. No body was recovered, no definitive conclusion was reached. What remained instead were fragments, pieces scattered across time and landscape, each one offering a glimpse yet withholding a resolution. Inspectors had first noted the scratches etched into the paint of a train compartment door, sharp and desperate, proof of struggle without explanation. Later, paw prints pressed faintly into snow appeared along the outskirts of barns and fields. Villagers told stories of a striped cat slipping into haylofts, glimpsed but never held, always vanishing before contact. Then came the discoveries that seemed to bind the whispers together. The medallion unearthed in frozen soil, engraved with the name Murka, and the broken leather collar found at the edge of a mapped trail. These artifacts, undeniable in their physicality, confirmed presence but not outcome. They proved only that Murka had been there, somewhere, sometime, moving beyond the night of her disappearance on the train. What happened after remained outside the reach of certainty. Interpretations grew in place of conclusions. Some believed Murka adapted fully to the wild, transforming from a domestic passenger cat into a survivor of barns, forests, and fields. They pointed to the consistent refusal of food left out, the independence implied by hunting behavior, and the ability to evade capture for nearly a decade. In their view, the striped cat had outsmarted both humans and circumstance, surviving against odds and avoiding final discovery. Others leaned toward a more finite reading. To them, the medallion found in the field represented the last trace of Murka, a fragment of identity left behind when her journey ended. The broken collar reinforced this idea, a discarded remnant marking the close of a life once entwined with mystery. They believed that the absence of further sightings confirmed what the object suggested, that Murka's trail had reached its conclusion long before the investigation did. In Siberian villages, however, the debate became more than evidence. Over time, the story passed into folklore. Children heard of the striped cat that boarded a train and vanished, yet continued to reappear in whispers, prints, and glints of metal. For some, Murka became a symbol of resilience, a creature who refused capture and defied explanation. For others, she was a reminder of uncertainty, the way mysteries linger when answers remain beyond reach. Even without resolution, the legend endured. Murka's story was told not as a case closed, but as one still open in memory. From scratches on a compartment door to fragments found years later, each piece invited speculation without delivering closure. The truth may never surface, but the enduring fascination ensured that Murka was never forgotten. Sometimes the smallest creatures leave behind the longest mysteries,